Hi, this is Ron Cipcic, and this is the sixth part of a six-part series on aggregate demand, aggregate supply analysis. And in this final segment, we're going to examine a possible cure for inflation, something called money rules. In our last lesson, in segment 5, we looked at the cause of inflation, and we arrived at this basic conclusion that inflation is a monetary problem, that inflation is caused by excessive money supply growth. Now, what do we mean by the term excessive? When is money supply excessive? When is the money supply growth excessive? Well, we quantified it using the quantity theory of money, and we came to this conclusion that if the percentage change in the money supply is greater than the percentage change in real GDP, then there'll be an increase in the level of prices. Of course, this assumes, it's very important to remember, this assumes that the velocity of money is constant. Its percentage change is near zero. Okay? So if excessive money supply growth is the problem, at least the problem in terms of causing inflation, then the solution would have to be resolving excessive. In other words, getting rid of excessive money supply growth. And this is where the concept of money rules comes in. So I'd like to define money rules, and then I'll show you basically how it works. All right, so let's go ahead and define money rules. Under a system of money rules, the central bank, in the case of the United States, this would be the Federal Reserve System, the central bank increases the money supply. Sorry about that. My pen is a little touchy today. At a constant rate equal to the long run growth rate of real GDP. In other words, the idea is m dot should equal y dot over time, and if m dot equals y dot over time, then the price level should remain relatively constant. So the goal of money rules is stable prices, where prices are not rising in general and they're not falling in general. Now, you write this down, you look at it, you go, wow, that's logical. If the cause of inflation is excessive money supply growth, where m dot is growing faster than y dot, well, then central bank ought to set the money supply growth rate equal to y dot, and that will bring about stable prices. There we go. Lesson finished. But it's not that easy, and we've got a couple problems here. One problem is the central bank doesn't directly, at least in the United States, the central bank does not directly control the money supply. Remember that the Federal Reserve System works through the banking system to create liquidity, to create deposits. And that, in fact, the Federal Reserve System does not control the level of deposits in the banking system. The Federal Reserve System only has the power to manipulate the level of reserves in the banking system. So the money supply is not really under direct control by any one policy-making entity. That's one problem. A second problem is that real GDP changes at different rates every year. In other words, GDP does not change at a constant rate every year, and policymakers can't directly control the rate of change of real GDP. So it's very difficult for policymakers to, even if they can grow the money supply at a constant rate, to grow it at a rate equal to the rate of real GDP. For instance, No policymaker in the United States knows exactly what real GDP is going to do next year in 2015. Nobody knows what it will grow at. So what do you grow the money supply rate at next year if you don't know what real GDP is going to grow at? What is real GDP going to grow at in the year 2020, in the year 2025, in the year 2050? No one knows. So real GDP grows at different rates every year. Some years it grows very fast, some years it grows very slow, and some years it even declines. So it's very difficult to predict what real GDP is going to do. Now, what policymakers can do is they could look at a historical average. And for the United States, the historical average has been, about 3.5%. Since macroeconomic data has been systematically accumulated in the United States. So let's say that in the United States the historical average is about 3%. Well, the idea of money rules would then say the money supply, if the money supply grows at roughly 3% a year, then on average over the long run we should have stable prices. And that in fact is how this would have to be applied, that money would have to grow at some long-term average growth rate equal to the long-run historical growth rate of real GDP. Alright, so let's go ahead and set up a little bit, let's set up a problem that will give us some insight into how this would work. Again, we go back to m dot plus v dot equals p dot plus y dot. Okay, and this is again the equation of exchange. We assume the quantity theory of money in every year, so we're going to assume that velocity is relatively stable. If velocity is not relatively stable, then this theory of inflation and this solution for inflation will not work as we are going to talk about it working. So we're going to set up 3 hypothetical years, year 1, year 2, and year 3. Let's say that we grow the money supply, we're the central bank, we grow the money supply at a rate equal to roughly 3% a year. And again, in the United States, this is no easy task because we have a decentralized banking system. Yes, we have a central bank. Yes, our central bank can manipulate outcomes in the banking system, but the banking system actually creates money, and the banking system is privately owned. This is not a command system, though it has command elements. So we grow the aggregate demand side. In theory, we grow the aggregate demand side at roughly 3% a year. All right, that's the idea. Now, on the right side, let's say that output is increasing in year 1. It's not going to increase at the same rate every year. Let's say it grows at a rate of 2% in year 1. It grows at a rate of 1% in year 2. And let's say it grows at a rate of, let's see, what do I have here? Yeah, let me change that. Let me, let's make this, let's make this 4% here. %1 here. And actually, let me make up my mind here. Sorry about that. You're trying to take notes and I'm messing with you. So +4 +2, I want to make the numbers work out nice, +3 here. Okay? So what do we got here? If you add up these percentages, which is kind of a no-no, you actually have a compounding effect here, so you really don't add up percentages like this over time, but let's just cheat a little bit and add that up. That's 9%, it's about 9%, so a little over 9% actually. Divide that by 3, you get the average of 3%. So we get the average of 3% growth. Now, what do prices do? Well, in the first year, prices actually go where? They go down. We have deflation. In the second year, we have slight inflation. In the third year, we have price stability. And if you add those add up to 0. 0 divided by 3 is 0. Okay, so again, the idea is we grow money. We don't hold the quantity of money constant. That's a myth. The money supply grows, but it grows at a rate roughly equal to the long-run growth rate of real GDP. And if the money supply can grow at roughly the long-run growth rate of real GDP, prices stay relatively stable over time. In some years they go up a little bit, some years they go down a little bit, but on average they stay roughly the same. So if we go back up to our model up here, if this is about 3% and this is about 3%, then this will be 0%. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and illustrate this. Let's draw the money rules diagram so we can see a picture of it. And it's a fairly easy model to draw. So vertical axis, horizontal axis, AS. Whoop, sorry about that. A little technical difficulties here. Bear with me. This is AS1. This is AD1. P1. YN1. Okay, now let's assume that the aggregate supply curve is growing at a rate of 3%. So we'll shift it to the right, and we will call this AS2. This is YN. That was my hand's fault, not my fault. My hand isn't following what I'm thinking here. YN2. And so this movement in aggregate supply is the 3% that we've been talking about. So YN, or aggregate supply, is growing at an average of 3%. Well, what do we want aggregate demand to grow by? We want aggregate demand to grow at roughly 3% as well. So aggregate demand. Remember what aggregate demand dot is. M dot plus V dot equals aggregate demand dot. So if this is plus 3, this is plus 0, this has to be plus 3. Alright, so aggregate demand is growing at roughly the same rate as aggregate supply, and what happens to prices? Prices remain what? Relatively stable. This has actually got a name. It's called long-run demand management. And the whole idea here is to not overstimulate aggregate demand. Long-run demand management. In the long run, we want aggregate demand to grow roughly in proportion with aggregate supply. And again, you make it look easy. The diagram and the example makes it look easy. This is no easy task in real life. Again, the central bank has to be able to control the money supply, money aggregates very carefully. That's difficult to do, particularly when there are shocks to the financial system. And then you have to make a good prediction of what real GDP is going to grow at. Nobody knows what real GDP will grow at every year, so you're going to go on some sort of average. And so there's always going to be some volatility in prices. As I showed you in the table up above, in some years the prices will go up, some years they'll go down. You're going to get fluctuation, but the beauty of this is you get fluctuation where? You get fluctuation around the same price level, and this provides greater certainty. You're going to have greater certainty when the price level is fluctuating around the same price level. All right, that concludes Lesson 6, which is a look at money rules, which is a possible cure for inflation. And again, the root cause of inflation is excessive money supply growth.